pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so the first order of agenda is we're going to move to the McLeod County resolution on the opposition of the North Star Act. Did everybody read through the enclosed materials so you have an idea of what McLeod County did on Saturday?
Yes.
Okay, I did ask Corey to come so he could explain if Minnesota becomes a sanctuary state, what that would involve for law enforcement. So do you want to come and talk to us, please?
Gotta keep that leg straight, so.
Oh, just put it up.
Right, yeah. This has pending issues, for our office, for the county. The sanctuary, situation that would face us would, we simply would not be allowed to cooperate with federal agencies like ICE any further if we had any illegal in our facility, or even out, in the public that we had a criminal, dealing with. And I think that's a big issue for us. I don't believe in that personally, and as a department head, I think it would be a hindrance and simply wrong. We just dealt with, we had a person in our jail charged with a very serious, criminal sexual conduct charge. It was a rape in our county. They were illegal. They ended up fleeing, while the charges were coming out. They used a false name. They were released, and we ended up. He got picked up in Georgia on a warrant, and we had to fly down there and get him. He was in our jail, and then finally, ICE came and picked him up here a couple of weeks ago, and he's set for deportation. If this, came into effect, I don't know that it would have happened that way. Honestly, if we can't cooperate with the federal agencies on these people, what do you do? And it's a big deal, and it's something that we need to take this very serious, because I do not want that becoming law in the state of Minnesota.
But don't your officers, when they become an officer and take their oath of office, doesn't it say that they uphold the laws of the United States and the state of Minnesota?
It does, and, so you do wonder.
They square this up then, yeah.
Yeah, you do wonder where the precedents, would come. So I don't know. We've never been faced with this before, so I've never, it's never become law, so I've never read the particulars of it, never got an attorney's opinion on it, but I don't want it to come to that either.
Based on the supremacy clause, I would think the federal law supersedes state law, unless state law is more restrictive.
It should be noted that the files, Senate File 2724 and House File 2860, were from last year's legislative session. They never even received a hearing. They were submitted. 10,000 bills were submitted last year. 100 were acted upon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's important to know the context. As I read them, it's, yes, completely to the supremacy clause. If it's a federal law, you can't not comply with it, right? Same as other issues that we've had dealing with that. I'm not an attorney, but what I will tell you is, looking both of those up, you can see they were submitted, they never got a hearing. So why this is coming up now, I'm not sure. If you go to the North Star Act webpage, you'll see that they've got in the last month, they've had they're trying to get traction, but I don't know how they can get traction to do something that in my opinion, appears to not be legal.
I want to be able to cooperate with our federal partners. I simply do. I want the cooperation from them, and they have always been great, willing to help. When we've had somebody, stopped, they've come down and assisted with identifying the person who, several times have been, illegally here in the United States and that are committing crimes in our county. So they have been great that way. And, so if we need their assistance, I want to be able to continue that. But I also want to be able to share information with them as well, which I believe this would prohibit that, so.
So the article that I read said that the author is trying to gain traction. So he brought it back up, and so if this is correct, it says the legislation will bar local, county, and state law enforcement and other government agencies like school districts from asking someone about their immigration status. It would also prohibit local and state agencies from sharing data or collaborating with federal officials to enforce immigration laws unless it's part of a criminal investigation. And Governor Walz previously indicated that he would support this bill. Whether he will this year or not, I don't know, but the article says that the author has brought it back up, hoping it will make a cut this year.
I certainly am supportive of doing the resolution because it sends a statement on how we feel as a local government entity about what they're doing down there. I don't think they have the right to do it, number one. I think be honest with you, I think they're hearing circus music in their head. They're crazy. This is just, it's not going to do any good for anybody. You look across the nation and anybody who has a sanctuary city or sanctuary county, they're a mess. They're an absolute mess right now. So why would we even consider going down that road? I can't imagine what they're thinking, but I don't want anything to do with it.
I agree.
And part of the problem is now because counties and cities are being strapped for funds, they're taking funds that are supposed to be used for the needs of the residents and instead diverting them to the illegal population.
And we have enough issues in the United States already, and you have veterans that are homeless and have issues, and we can't have enough money to support them, people that put their lives on the line for our country, and yet and you might remember when they were called illegal aliens, and then they became undocumented, now they're migrants. I just read the other day where one of the legislators was calling them undocumented Americans, and it's just bizarre. And to me, though, if they don't come into the country through the proper channels, it's an illegal alien. I'm sorry, but that's, by definition, that's what it is. And I agree with David. I fully support this resolution. I think we hopefully will have it ready for next week's board meeting.
I don't think there's anybody on this board that's not for immigration done correctly.
Yep.
But if it's done incorrectly, and you see it on the news, these sanctuary places are getting busloads of immigrants, and they do not have the capacity to handle it. They don't have the capacity in their school systems. They don't have the capacity in their social services system. They don't have the capacity in housing. It creates an absolute mess. So if the state does this, it's going to create a mess. Self-inflicted. Bad deal.
Jonathan has not been in the office the past couple of days. I forwarded this to him yesterday, and his note said that he was going to try to get a review on it, and I would hope that he would get a review. So if you say you'd like to put this on for action at a future meeting, I'd just ask that we give him, he's down in Houston for a few days, so if we would just give him some time to review it before it does. As I said, the files that are referenced are last year's non-acted upon files. It might almost be better to rewrite the language to simply say something like those, or if a bill is introduced now to use the current numbers from this legislature. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, and this article doesn't have a this year's
Yeah, the session just opened yesterday,
Yes,
so
I know that, yeah.
we'll take a look and see.
It's a prudent thing to do.
We'll see how,
Yeah,
if we can
Jonathan,
beat
okay.
10,000,
I do
which is
believe
not a
our-
goal, but it's probably likely to happen.
Our local legislators would appreciate the support from us too, to prevent it from getting any traction in the first place. I mean, if enough
think
of this
that's
happens,
important, yeah.
you know, in the rural counties, people find out, or the ones presenting the bill find out that it's very unpopular, they may back off.
But just the language in this draft that says the legislature is reviewing approval of state,
Yep.
this file, and this file is not accurate because those were last year's files. If they're reintroduced, they'll have different numbers. So, j- some language would be easy enough to make it, to say the same thing without being technically inaccurate.
And I've had a few emails on this already and a couple of conversations with people from Hubbard County.
I have too.
And I'm sure that they're gonna be glad that we're working on this, that we share their concerns, and we're gonna do what we can.
Because if you think about the public safety aspect of this, you know, if we take that, you know, person that, you know, we had in our jail for the rape charges, if all of a sudden, hypothetically, they made bail, okay, they bailed out. But if there really was an ICE hold on them, for example, from someplace, under this, we would not even be allowed to notify ICE, hey, this person is bailing out at 1 o'clock today. You know, if you want them, be on deck and grab him, you know, when he gets released out of our jail. And that's a big thing.
And
you
he
know.
goes out and commits another crime, are we liable?
Exactly. It's some, yeah, you wonder, you
Yeah.
know.
It's kind of like, it's negligence.
Yes, it's a public safety issue, and it's an important issue, and I want nothing to do with that. Seriously, this thing has ramifications, and like I say, we need those federal partners. They need us, and when you work hand in hand, it's good business.
This McLeod County, they held a special session
Yeah, they
in
did.
order to get this passed prior to the start of the Minnesota legislation, which is already in session right now. So if we don't get it on Tuesday's agenda, it'll be a couple weeks before we do get it to it. And, you know, they can probably slip this by in that short amount of time. You know, with or without Jonathan's blessing, I think it ought to be on Tuesday's agenda.
I agree with you, Tom.
Yep, me too. Get it on Tuesdays.
Okay. Anything else for Corey?
Steve, you got anything on it?
No.
So the consensus, I think, are you included in this, Steve? You'd
Yes.
like to see this on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so Jeff, please add it to the agenda.
I will do that for
Hopefully
the
we can have
20th.
a draft to approve or
Yeah, okay,
move forward.
thank you.
Yep, you bet.
I just got an email from Jonathan.
Okay.
It's kind of weird how I can make that happen, but he said he would advise the board to take no action on the North Star Act, with the possible exception of a resolution strongly urging the state to take a position one way or the other, even though the act may cause more problems than assistance. So I need clarification on that.
Yeah.
That doesn't really say much, but I will tell him that you've asked for it to be on the agenda next week, and we'll review what he would like to put in that file. I told him that getting back to me last night was not critical, because there's no way that any action could be taken until the
Right.
20th, so.
Yeah. Okay, so should we go back up to,
Go to
1-1?
item number 2,
Or item number 2, okay?
because I think that's a quicker conversation.
Okay.
And this has been batted around, and I apologize that it took so long to get on there, but it's relatively inconsequential. The Extension Office is asking for an additional 3 weeks' worth of pay during the fair to be added to their current budget, with a total implication of $1,800. And this is what the originally approved budget looks like. That's what the new budget would look like. So it's administration, it's additional hands-on during the course of the county fair, as I understand it, is what the request is for. And if you're willing to consider that, be discussion, and we just plop it on the consent agenda for next week.
Who's on the Fair Board? Is it Ted and Dave?
Dave and,
Steve and I.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you two have comments on this?
Well, I think with Mary Jo retiring, we're gonna have a lack of staff, and she does a lot for the fair. So I think it's a beneficial move.
Yeah, the fair actually requested it because the problem is the contract with Mary Jo's hours, the 4-H Extension Administrator, is they're not real flexible in that contract and how they can use their time and how many hours they can work. Where the assistant, there's a lot more ability to do that. So they've struggled over the years because there's plenty of work to be done. And then Mary Jo couldn't stay on longer. And so then they had this void of nobody there knowing what was going on. So they were looking for a solution to this. And this seems to be the most practical way to deal with it in the least expensive way. We'll be looking for a new assistant too here coming up. So it'll be a new person too. But I think long-term, this is the right way to handle it and will be very beneficial for whoever the new extension person is.
When's your retirement date?
May,
May 1st.
May-
Mary Jo's
was it
May
May
1st.
1st?
So she won't be helping during the fair.
No.
No, what'll happen too is, the U of M won't do a new search until September. So there will be an interim one that'll be put in place for the summer, which is what happened before too. So, yeah.
I've been to the fair, she does a good job at the fair.
So it could be, hopefully they get an interim in there that has experience with fairs and stuff, so that'll make it a little easier, but
It seemed like the last time that an interim stepped in, it worked out quite well,
Yeah.
from what I had heard, so.
no, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just gonna be the way it is, so we'll just work our way through it and make the adjustments we can, and I think this adjustment will help.
I know we gave them an increase in their budget this year, but this seems like a modest request. Less than 1%, less than 1% of 1% of their budget increase. So it's, I would be okay with it.
Is everyone okay with it being on the consent agenda?
And we have the money to, I always gotta ask if we have the money to go, it's $1,900, $1,800. You got it, you can get it somewhere?
Yeah, that, I'm hoping if investments continue to, and after my meeting last week with them, that we should exceed our budgeted amount, so there's a little bit of flex there. Without looking any deeper, I can say, yes, I think we're comfortable with our investment, budget.
Okay, so that can go on the consent agenda?
Okay?
And then should we go back up to 1-1?
Sure, and we're gonna end up probably having a break. As soon as Dan Tinter from Ehlers gets here, he's driving up from the cities. We had talked about 10 o'clock. We'll start. Bruce Kimmel is gonna be joining us on video. It was gonna be flip-flopped until Bruce had some family health issues overnight and needs to be home, so Dan's driving. So this is just a session that I attended. I think this was put on by MCIT, and it just gave an update and a refresher on the remote attendance portion of the new remote attendance portion of open meeting law. And
I viewed it too, and then it's also on the MCIT website.
Yep,
So I viewed it a second time. As you guys know, sometimes I read this stuff twice because I capture more.
so I just wanted to review it because it comes up and it affects us all, and we've been doing it 98% correctly. There's one step that we have to do, Tom's right, and I'll just say it right now that Tom was right, that we need to do a roll call vote if anybody is attending remotely. That's the one thing we haven't done, and we need to. We have had no lack of clarity on what everybody is voting, but the statute still does require that, so.
Except we had to go one step further than what we did it when Dave was gone. We gotta do a roll call for everybody.
Yep, that's what I mean. You're required to do a roll call for everybody, not just the people that are remote, so.
So I have a question on one of the committees I'm on, and every time it's in person and Zoom. And so the chair just said, if anyone's opposed, speak up. So are you telling me that at that meeting, every single vote needs to be done by roll call?
If there's a member of the body that's remote, yes. If we're in a situation where you're just broadcasting and just people are viewing, no. But if all the members of the body are in the same room, the posted room, then you don't need a roll call vote. If one of them is participating remotely, then every vote should be by roll call.
So that's why the Prime West, if you're remote, you cannot vote.
Here's a potential solution for that. I'm on a committee that has several large members. What they do is they get consensus to put it on a consent agenda at the end of the meeting. And then they just take all those items that go on that consent agenda, at the end, they take one large roll call vote that way then.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and if you get somebody that doesn't want it on that consent agenda, then you have to do it separately.
Well,
That
that's a
seems to
really
work
good
good
idea.
instead of, because I mean, if you've got 50 members on 2 different committees you gotta take votes from, boy, you're gonna burn up an hour and a half just taking votes.
Yeah, so that's the primary thing. The open meeting law presumes all governing bodies are open to the public, as long as there's a quorum in attendance. I think everybody knows the basic piece of that. And these changes to this legislation have come since COVID, since the emergency orders. The 13D021 really doesn't apply anymore, but it's on the books in case there ever is an emergency order again. The requirements now, it used to be that you could phone in, but now all participating board members, which means any that are gonna vote, can hear and see one another. So it used to be that the electronic participation allowed for telephone or, teleconference calls, and that it's not allowed anymore. They have to be able to see and hear.
But they could, a voting member could access that way, they just could not vote, but they could be able to hear the meeting.
Yeah, if they're not able to meet all these requirements,
Yeah,
they can attend but not participate in the
Yes.
vote. Yep. And then the other thing is at least one member of the body is physically present at the noticed meeting location, right? So, for example, last night the HRA had a meeting and Dewey was in the room and Kathy was in the room as voting members of that body. Here's the additional requirements. All votes are conducted by roll call, and each location at which a member of the body is present must be open and accessible to the public. We've been doing a good job with that.
So do addresses then need to be posted ahead of time?
They're supposed to, yep. The ones for the HRA meeting last night were posted on the website
Okay.
on Friday, so,
And
and we post them on our official posting location on this window.
And we only need 3 days' notice on that part of it.
Okay.
There was a question about can it be another state, but how about in another country?
At this point in time, I don't believe there's a restriction. As
Well, the
long-
public should join you.
Yeah.
So this exemption is if they're serving in the military or if they've been advised by a health professional, and there's a limit of 3 exceptions per year, and the exception is to posting their location. They can participate without posting their location for these 2 items up to 3 times a year, and I believe it's cumulative.
And that's where I had some confusion, where I thought you could only participate 3 times a year remotely. But if I understand correctly, if we follow all the procedures properly, I don't want to say it's unlimited number of times, but in essence it is. But
Yeah, this exception is not that they can participate that way, it's that they do not have to provide their location
yeah,
to participate remotely, meeting all the previous conditions. So the way this is put together, it's actually pretty well put together. You have to follow these steps in order. You can't put this slide up at the top to say you can do this up to 3 times a year. You can only do it after all of the conditions to this point have been met. And now you have the exception. If it's for military service, if you've been advised by a health professional, then you can participate without providing notice of your location. And then here's the bit, notice of regular meeting location and notice of location of any board member will be via interactive technology with the previous 3 exceptions. And then exactly as Ted mentioned, that those must be posted in the principal bulletin board, mailed or otherwise delivered to each person who has filed a written request for special meetings at least 3 days before the meeting dates. So the way that Hubbard County handles requests for updates on information is we ask people to subscribe to the agenda, and we post that information on the agenda. So if we republish that and send notify, then people who requested notifications get that, and now it's on the agenda that they got. So in addition to, all of our notices are published on this window, which is really hard for many people to see. They're pushed out electronically as part of the agenda to anybody who's requested them. And then the bit about the minutes reflects that people participated remotely. Not really concerned about the Chapter 12, and I really think that that's about all that's in here. This is a summary. All members of the body participating can hear one another and hear. Yeah, see and hear is supposed to be what it is. And at least one member of the body or an administrative officer is present in the regular meeting location, unless it's an emergency. All votes are conducted by a roll call. I think that consensus and rolling things down into essentially a summary vote at the end would probably suffice.
The only thing I didn't, and that this, I don't think covered unless I missed it, is say that when the meeting is posted, you're given a location because you're not gonna be there, and you plan to do it remotely, but then all of a sudden things change and you end up at the meeting. I think that's okay, but.
That's fine.
Yeah, 'cause then I questioned, okay, was there some public people that were gonna go to that address then that you'd posted, but you end up not being there because you're.
I believe it would be fine if the plans changed and you were able to participate at the scheduled place.
That's what I was hoping, 'cause what if it's, out of state or something, or in a different country, for some reason you got back and now somebody's.
I would say that electronically, if we knew that your plans had changed and it was only 1 day before, we would probably publish. We would make the correction and publish and push. And that would just be to be as diligent as possible, but there's nothing stopping a member from participating from the location.
Okay.
Well, thank you for bringing this forward. I'm gonna
Yeah.
pass this on to some of my committees.
I attended it and I thought that MCIT did a good job with this. So limit on remote attendance, no, it's a policy decision. Can it be fully remote? Probably not, because the requirement for at least one member to be in the position, in the space. And the change of plans, this is one asking it the other way, so I can't make it. But if they can't provide notice 3 days ahead of time, again, they could participate, but they wouldn't be able to vote. Shouldn't be able to vote. And if they're ill, as long as 13D02 are met, they've been advised by a health professional that they shouldn't be in public. and we have notification of that, and they can't already have done so 3 times in the year. So again, just the summary, Bart.
It's kind of strange that you'd have to provide your location, but then in the monitoring requirement, there's no requirement for remote locations to be open and accessible to the public.
Which piece is that?
It is page 11. It's right before public comment period. There's no requirement for remote locations to be open and accessible to the public, but yet you still have to require your address.
Yeah, and that's for the 13D.021, so that would be when there's like an emergency or COVID type thing. So it's a little different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's not, that's,
Okay,
yeah,
great.
that's
My
specific.
misunderstanding.
Yep.
Yeah, and I thought about this too, how many of my committees in that, most of them are in person. I can think of 3 of them where there is some remote participation. So I'm going to advise those executive directors to go to the MCIT website.
Yep.
And it's an hour and 6 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
Very well done.
Yeah, they recorded the whole thing, the whole presentation, and I just wanted to make sure that we reviewed it because the questions had come up, so.
It's one of those things, maybe we should have a refresher every few years too. Of course, who knows, maybe laws will change again.
So I'm thinking of, this happened at a Prime West meeting, so the board member, although he knew he couldn't vote, he was out of state and he could not get his computer to work, so he called in. So it's still okay to listen, but can they even offer conversation? Because we could not see him.
Yeah, full participation means voting. So,
Yep.
I would say that would mean if he's not able to meet the conditions to be seen and heard, and in a noticed, location, that he probably wouldn't vote.
Right, but he could still then participate in the
Yep.
conversation.
Yep.
Okay.
You know, at that point, essentially at the discretion of the chair of that
Yep.
group.
Okay.
And the question, can a member be out of state? Yes, there's nothing in the law that addresses the location. We could read the advisory opinion. I don't know if they would say if you were out of the country, if that would change. If it doesn't address it, it doesn't address it, so. What happens if a video connection drops? And here it says if they lose video and they maintain audio, probably not full participation. And does a board need to conduct a roll call vote if only one board member is participating from location? Yes, they answered the question very specifically for us.
It's interesting that they say hear and see, because actually, I think it's really distracting. A lot of times, if you watch what people do, so a lot of times I don't have my video on, because I just find it distracting to try to watch other people while we're conducting business.
Yeah. And I'll admit, I had a technical glitch one recent time when we had somebody participating remotely, and I didn't open things in the right order, so if I put the video conference over here, we couldn't see the agenda. So I kind of just made a flash decision just to leave it the way that it was, but I think I know the order of operations. If I open the video and then share the agenda screen, I can get them all on one page cleanly, so. Anyway, I wanted to bring that one
Yeah, thank you.
forward as just a reminder because I thought it was timely and I thought it was well done by MCIT. And the next item that we have is waiting for Dan to get here, so I don't know if I have a couple of updates I could give.
Go ahead.
There was a proposal from the Minnesota Department of Revenue on how they were handling taxes for state assessed utilities. And they've put together a proposal that they might do it some different way. And they're offering kind of a draft of what that is and an opportunity for public input. And I read through that yesterday and as you can imagine, the public utilities would be paying less based on the new proposal than they currently are, which would affect us, and I don't know to what degree it would. So I've signed up to participate in that and make sure that I've communicated with AMC to make sure that I know what's going on with that. Matt said that he believes that that's just an idea that's not gonna be coming forward in this legislative session, but we're gonna be keeping an eye on it.
Didn't the box stores take the state of Minnesota to court and the state of Minnesota lost? That was a few years
To
back.
some element, they're related, but not the same issue.
Okay, so this doesn't,
This is not the,
because that was how they were assessed.
the state currently assesses those things for their highest and best use.
Yep.
And the box stores said, if this is sitting vacant, that's not its highest and best use. Its highest and best use is a parking lot. So that was their argument of
Okay.
whether they should be valued at their highest and best use if they're empty, or if they should be valued at the lowest possible. But they're actually proposing not valuing these properties at all. And in my mind, I think what they're saying is that we're just gonna take their word. They're gonna give us their revenue generated along those utilities. We're gonna take that and we're gonna calculate, and they're gonna pay a tax based on the revenue for that. But the state of Minnesota has done several, I would almost call them bait and switch issues related to property taxes. The state general sales tax, when seasonal recs stopped paying on local school bond issues and started paying into the state general sales tax, that revenue has never kept pace back to the local communities like it was intended to. And this is a situation where if we're relying on the organizations to submit their revenues, basically the utilities are wanting to pay lower taxes. Like, we get that, everybody wants to pay lower taxes, but I don't remember, I think the number was $32 million less in the first year, and I don't know what percentage that is of the total, which is why I'm signed up to go participate. The Aiken County Administrator they're very much affected by this as well, recently, so she keeps sending me these notes, and I'm getting some from Kay, because they're being distributed to the auditors network throughout the state. Anyway, that's something to pay attention to. And then when I was at the Ehlers Public Finance meeting a week and a half ago, I heard a bit of information about what the proposed legislation related to tax forfeiture could look like going forward. And I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. In some ways, it might make it easier. In some ways, it might make it harder. And I haven't seen the actual proposed language. But as I understand it, counties would be kind of completely out of it, and it would be handled as a sale through a bank or through the state, and never come to be a tax forfeited property. That as soon as it forfeits, it would be sold through some mechanism, and it would never really be become a county issue. So maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. The biggest question that comes in is currently a public entity has the opportunity to stop something from going on the sale, to be able to say, we have a purpose for this. And as I understand, that's being written out of this. Now, is that being written out of this for everything that's currently in tax forfeit? Or is that being written out for anything that would forfeit after a certain point in time? I have no idea, but I'll give you one example. Right now, I know that the city of Akeley is interested in acquiring the old diner that's right next to their space, because they'd like more space for city functions. And to this point, we have the opportunity, they have the opportunity when it goes on sale in March, they can send a letter and say, we'd like this withheld for a public purpose, and then they have 3 years to use it for that purpose, or then it reverts back to forfeit it, right? In much the same way, if we have tax forfeited parcels up in northern part of the county that we want to use for housing, we better do it this year before any legislation takes effect, is part of my concern. But also, I don't know if that language is gonna mean we could never do that again, or if we would have to do it all this year, right? But I know we have the time, if we have a sale in the fall, to process those things, because anything enacted in this legislature would not take effect until after, probably the first of the year next year.
So, did they discuss anything about payback?
No, and this was actually in a conversation about financing of public, private partnerships, and she just kind of dropped that, and I went and I talked to her, and I'm like, so it really wasn't a presentation on this, I just ended up getting to meet somebody who's on the work group who's putting this language together. And then I asked for a copy of it, and I haven't seen it yet, so.
So that's way different than what AMC was working on in
Yeah,
December.
and, Matt explained something a lot different
Yeah.
back in December. He said counties can make a choice of whether or not they want to foreclose or not. And, if they don't want to, they can just let it stay that way for as long as they wanted to.
Yeah, so my point in bringing these two up is that during this legislative session with thousands of bills being introduced, it's gonna be really important for us to follow at least a couple of these through. There's the bits that are on the MRC platform or the AMC platform, where we know that people are following those through and providing us updates. And if you haven't signed up to participate in the AMC updates or the MRC updates, make sure that you do. It's gonna be a busy session. And does everybody know you can log into Revisor and take a look at the bill introduction list and create your bills list so that you get a notification if anything changes to something you're interested in?
Where's that site?
Revisor, I think it's,
REVIS,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, under revisor.mn.gov, you can go in and you can create your own bills list. And anything you add to your list, you'll get notifications if there's a change in its status. It's been second revision, it's going to committee, it's been combined with this, it's, whatever action is taken. So if you go to revisor.mn.gov, you can create your bills list and follow those along, so.
Chris, you might have to read through the 10,000 bills. Find the
Tip,
ones
you
you're-
might, or you might do it like I do, and when you get a notice that comes from somebody that we should be watching this one, I add that. Sometimes I do peruse as I'm going through, but the duplication,
Does the keyword search help?
a keyword search will help.
Okay.
It may or may not get you to the, like I said, if there's 10,000 bills introduced, 8,000 of them are being introduced for somebody to make a statement and never intend to be carried forward. But if somebody says you should follow this one, you can just look that one up and click the box and say, yep, I want to follow this one and see what's going on. But that's a tool that I use and will be using more this year, but I'm particularly interested in anything that might come up along the state assessed and the tax forfeited process, because those will both affect us significantly.
Okay. Did you have anything else, or was that it?
Nope, that was it. I just wanted, those were fresh on the mind.
Okay, thank you, and so it looks like we can go to the presentation.
Dan is here. Let me see if Bruce is ready to join.
Denise, would you register me for, yeah, thank you. I will not stay either, I'll just drive. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
A friend of mine kept track of how many sunny days we've had the last 2 Januaries. As I'm thinking about you driving up without the sun today. This year we had 5 days, and that didn't mean the sun shone throughout the day, it just meant the sun actually peeked out of the clouds. So in the month of January, there was 5 days we saw the sun.
It does make for not too shabby driving weather.
Yeah?
It's easy to get it distracted when the sun is shining, you can see everything.
It's so uplifting though.
It is.
You can walk him around, Dan, if you want to.
You hear this old song about it never rains in Southern
Yes,
California?
I remember that
And
song.
then they go and say, man, it pours. Well, I can just tell you, man, it pours.
I'm going to share my screen.
On our return trip, it was rough, heavy wind. It was like a tropical storm.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what, and no one is sitting there.
Oh, okay.
So there's only the 5 of us here and then Jeff. And then Denise probably will want one in the back. I can run that back to her.
No, I'm happy to do it.
Are you sure? Okay,
Oh, excuse me, sir.
thank you.
Almost too much paperwork for you this morning.
We're helping out the paper industry, which helps out the loggers.
Well, there you go. We're doing what we can.
Bruce, I think you can see that Dan is handing papers out to the commissioners now.
I can, yes.
Okay. So we've essentially got 3 items, kind of wrap this up. And again, this was a conversation I had with Dan and Bruce last week on 3 of our current issues. One of them is the consideration of whether the county should create an EDA, and if they should, what they should do, what powers it should have, what powers it could have, how it should be organized, what options there are, what the process is to make something like that happen. The second one is to talk about a financial management plan. This isn't the first time that we've talked about
Oh, okay.
the first time that we've talked about that. We'll get a little detail on what that would look like. And then the third one just came up as a result of our conversation last week, just to look at what bonding options are and scenarios are relative to the proposed jail project and what that would look like long-term for the county. So, Dan, do you know where you want to start this morning?
I believe Bruce wanted to start with the EDA discussion.
Does that work for you, Jeff, and board?
I think that's fine with us.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Bruce Kimmel with Ehlers, and thanks for allowing me to join you via Zoom. My best intentions were to be there right next to Dan in front of you in person, but my family life kind of went sideways, and so I appreciate the flexibility this morning. I wanted to start with the EDA topic because I know it's been a subject of some interest for a number of you, and also it's one that I can actually speak to with a fair amount of authority because I helped Wright County through the entire process of establishing an EDA back in 2020 and 2021. It was a process that was born actually of their interest in being able to be an active participant in the redevelopment of the county's former government center and jail. It's a site, I don't know if any of you know it, down in downtown Buffalo, Minnesota, that's right on a lake, and absent EDA powers, it was the county's understanding from their attorney that they would just have to auction off that land to the highest bidder and really would have very little control or say in how that site got redeveloped. And for a number of reasons, the county wanted to have a more hands-on role there as well as on a couple of other projects, and so saw fit to go through the process of setting up an EDA. They did not already have an existing HRA, so the question of giving the HRA EDA powers was not applicable in their case. And so that's a little bit different than what we might be contemplating, or at least some of the options that we'd be looking at in Hubbard County. But other than that, the process as laid out in state statutes would be the same. And I thought I could just go through that process with you. Please ask me any questions that you might have. So I'll be referring to the third and fourth pages of the first handout, the EDA handout that talks about the scope of work. I apologize, I updated the first 2 pages to reflect Hubbard County, but you can see that I failed to do that with the scope of work. So I will certainly fix that going forward. I guess that does speak to one positive. It's not a process that a lot of counties go through in this day. A lot of counties set up EDAs back in the 80s. But since I've already figured out, how and invented the wheel, we will be able to, I think, have a pretty efficient process with Hubbard County as a result of all of the legwork that we did in Wright County. And I think that will allow us to come in with a much less expensive process as well if you see fit to go forward with that. But the steps as we would see them, and this dovetails with the requirements that are specified in section 469.1082, would of course to have a kickoff meeting with you specific to this subject. We would want to really get a sense of why you're interested in setting up an EDA. Dan and I have had some discussions with Jeff about some development opportunities, both housing and business in the county, but really get a sense from you as to what you see are the opportunities, what you see are the current weaknesses and missed opportunities, and any other concerns or hopes and dreams, if you will, that you would have for a prospective countywide EDA. We would then need to provide notice to all of the local government units, that's both cities and townships within the county, that you're taking steps to establish or at least consider the establishment of a new county EDA. We would need to then have you adopt a resolution to create a committee or a task force for the purpose of studying options and making recommendations. And the requirements for that are laid out in step 4. And I would note that the requirements for this committee actually differ from those for a city that is looking at setting up an EDA. So I believe in your packet you had some information from the city of Oakdale, and some of that is applicable whereas some of it isn't, because again we need to follow the county specific requirements. The biggest one is that you need to have an 11 to 15 person committee. Why that number? Who knows what the legislature was thinking. And we can have up to 2 county board members. I would recommend that certainly. And then you can see the other eligible jurisdictions and organizations that could participate in this as well. And I would note that a town or a city that appoints a member or has a member on the task force, that governing body of that unit of government needs to actually pass a resolution or a motion just officially naming that individual to the committee. Step 5 is really where the rubber hits the road. We had a few meetings with the Wright County task force, both in person and virtually, to really do that same kind of SWOT analysis, if you will, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, the overall landscape, and other considerations. Looking at the existing entities in Hubbard County and also operating in Hubbard County, and thinking about how this EDA might partner or just interact with an existing agency or organization. And then really looking at the options that are laid out under state law to either establish a new county EDA, require an existing HRA to adopt EDA powers, and that would be an option in Hubbard County. To pursue special legislation, and this is really more if you want to set up something called a community development agency, which really I don't think would be germane in your situation. Or to say, we've looked at all the evidence and all the options, and we don't think it makes sense to set up an EDA. Now, of course, you as the board can decide otherwise on any of those recommendations, but that is the mandate of the task force or committee, is to ultimately give you a recommendation as to what kind of organization should be established. And also it should talk about the area of EDA operations. Presumably that would be the entire county. And there is some specific language in the statute about situations in which you overlap with a city EDA or an HRA with EDA powers. We would propose to facilitate that entire committee process, as well as drafting the report and presenting it to the county board, and then also working with an attorney to draft. And there's some good examples, and I think Jeff even included some in your packet of organizing bylaws and charters and so on, as to the makeup and the mandate of a new county EDA. But we could help facilitate that as well if you saw fit to have us involved after the establishment of an EDA. So why don't I stop there and ask what questions you have about the process, or some of the bigger picture questions that you might have as well about why you might establish an EDA.
Bruce, if I could, there's two questions that I think that go way back to the first thing, the kickoff meeting with the county board. One would be to talk about the range of powers that a county EDA would have. And two would be to talk a little more specifically about how EDA, HRA, local development corps might work and how that organization might look. Because I think the kickoff meeting with the county board has got to identify the scope of powers and authority. Again, you talked about the types of projects that we would like to take on that we don't currently have the ability to take on. So really, we got to start there. What do we do? What do we want to do that we don't have authority to do? And then what powers are available? And I've used the example of specifically like Otter Tail County established their EDA a few years ago, and they've already had 2 revision resolutions increasing the powers for that because they stepped into it and they realized they didn't have the authority to do everything they wanted to do. So I don't know if you can back up and talk a little bit more about scoping and a bit like that, because that may answer some of the questions, or it may help help people ask more specific questions.
So Bruce,
Right.
Bruce,
Yep.
if I could throw something in with Jeff there, for a practical, if you could use this comparison as you're talking about what Jeff brought up in response to what Jeff was asking.
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I believe that Jeff included all of chapter 469 in your board packet, which was really impressive, Jeff.
Thank you.
And so
Yeah, that
I
was,
hope
like,
you've
really
all
dry.
read all like 200 pages of it. But EDA powers or powers of HRAs with EDA powers granted to them are very extensive, and it allows an EDA and in turn a county to participate in economic development or housing development in ways that the parent jurisdiction, the county in this case, really can't under state law. And that includes acquiring and developing property, but it also includes putting in infrastructure in the case of an industrial park, or there's at least some limitations on what a city can do on its own in that regard. And where a big difference is in your ability to leverage development tools such as tax increment financing potentially, and also bonding mechanisms that are specific to economic development authorities, or again, HRAs with EDA powers. So it really gives you a set of tools, and we can certainly go into a lot more detail on this, going forward as to the tools with which to advance development objectives, whatever they might be, around the county, and or to partner with other entities such as, prospectively, the city of Park Rapids. I would note, and I'm just using them as an example because of the county seat. Wright County, if I can just give it another example from them, they felt, they knew that they could enter into tax abatements, for instance, for development purposes at the county level. But they really felt that they wanted to have an EDA in part to be the clearinghouse and the hub from which to entertain and to execute on local requests for county participation as well. So they had their own county initiatives, like the redevelopment of the government center site that they wanted to advance with an EDA. But then they said, you know, we really should have an entity within the county that has the tools and the responsibility to partner with other jurisdictions. And there's also some funding that's available from the United States Economic Development Agency that is only accessible by EDAs. So if you wanted to tap those resources going forward, you really need an EDA entity in place in order to be eligible to apply for and receive some of that federal development-related funding. So those were a few of the motivations that Wright County had, and then I think would probably be applicable for you as well. And then certainly we can talk more about some of the specific tools and actions that an EDA can use in developing an industrial park, in helping to develop workforce housing, or whatever the case might be, that counties don't have. I should note that one last point before I take a breath and let you talk some more is that HRAs can be granted EDA powers under state law, and that's one of the options available in Hubbard County. But EDAs already have HRA powers. So the EDA statute is more powerful in and of itself, if you will, than the HRA statute. So an EDA could get involved in housing development just right out of the gate because of the powers granted under state law. Whereas if an HRA wanted to do certain kinds of business development, it would need to, have the county grant it EDA powers, if that makes sense. Let me stop there and see if that was on the mark, or if you want me to dig deeper at this point.
Bruce, Commissioner Delahunt here. My question relates to, in order to do some economic development countywide, right now, we lack sufficient tools to be able to do that. Within the city of Park Rapids, they have an EDA. So they have tools available to them at their disposal that the county's been able to work with them to create some economic development within the city of Park Rapids. But if we want it countywide and have the opportunity to take advantage of situations when they arise, it's really not easy to do without a county-wide EDA, is that correct?
That is correct, yes. Yeah.
'Cause you need those tools.
Normal's not the right word, but it's not sort of a given corporate purpose of a county in and of itself. In fact, cities actually have more sort of standing authority to get involved in economic development than counties do, absent an EDA. You're correct. In order to really explore the full range of tools, even if you decide not to use most of those tools, ultimately for a variety of financial or policy reasons, you would want to have an EDA in place, or again, an HRA with EDA powers.
And so I think that that's been the main impetus of doing this, is because there is a desire of this county board to do economic development outside of the city of Park Rapids when those opportunities present themselves. But there's just no tools in place in most cases to do that outside of some simple things.
So could you, Bruce, this is Shar, could you give examples of tool chest, things that we don't have currently but we would have for countywide development if we had an EDA?
Well, one very powerful tool that you could elect to exercise or not would be an EDA levy. Wright County, in their situation, for a variety of reasons, opted not to exercise a levy right away, although they didn't preclude themselves from implementing a levy at a future date if their situation and priorities warranted some of that dedicated funding. But EDA levies are very flexible in how they can be used. There's really very few strings or limits on what that funding can be used for. Of course, you can just levy for economic development purposes and then transfer money to an EDA. But in a lot of counties, they want that direct link between a levy and being able to show what that money is going for specifically. So that's one tool. Then there are a number of bonding mechanisms that EDAs can leverage to fund infrastructure, to fund attainable housing, either for workforce or seniors or both. There is the ability to acquire and sell land outside of the normal requirements that you have for land sales and dispositions at the county level. Those are really some of the biggest ones that I can think of. The levy, the financing mechanisms, and then your ability to acquire land and sell that. One last thing I would note, this is a higher level of engagement than you may wish to be involved with, but let's say you had a business in the county that wanted a new facility, but for a variety of reasons didn't want to develop or operate it, own it itself. Or maybe there's an existing building or facility in the county that would be perfect for this entity, but again, for whatever reason, they didn't want to procure that themselves. The county EDA could actually issue bonds to either acquire property or to develop property, and then you could lease that property to a private entity and use the lease payments to repay the bonds. That's what's called a lease revenue bond, and that's something that only EDAs and HRAs can do in Minnesota, is to have that kind of financing that's repaid with the rents from property. Now there's lots of considerations there. There is some risk there, right? What happens if they go belly up and don't make the rent payments? And so I'm not saying, let's go out and sell lease revenue bonds and build a bunch of stuff, but it is a tool that has been used effectively in a number of other counties and cities around the state to facilitate development in specific situations.
I have a question about EDA's power to levy. As a citizen, I always would have problems of anyone other than an elected official having the power to levy. Is this something that would be, if the EDA wanted to do a levy, would that be cleared to the Board of Commissioners here, or can they do it on their own?
Great question. Thank you for raising that, Commissioner. Yes, the EDA can request a levy, but it ultimately needs to be approved by the county board. So that is correct.
Just like the current HRA levy is requested by the HRA board and approved by the county commissioners.
And then one other question, the federal funding, that sounds like a big plus. What kind of funding is possible, and what can we use for?
I am not actually sure of the full scope of that. We typically have not gotten super involved with US EDA programs. Dan, I don't know if you've run into any of that in your former life on the city side of things, but that's something we could certainly research and get back to you on.
Commissioners, generally with the federal government and the Economic Development Authority, the funds that they will administer will usually be tied to various federal programs, usually ones that have just been recently authorized by certain federal actions. So for example, right now with the Inflation Reduction Act, they'll administer any number of programs related to energy efficiency or perhaps certain infrastructure projects that are tied to goals related to that legislation. And then they have a number of standing programs as well. I don't have an exhaustive list for you here today, but as Bruce mentioned, we can certainly collect some examples that would be most useful and advantageous to the county and provide that to the county board after the meeting.
I believe you can get a federal funds for an RLF too. Is that correct?
Commissioners, yes, it is correct. You can actually, you can capitalize a revolving loan fund through state funds or federal funds. So it really depends on what grant programs you're accessing. Typically, you'll get the money, you'll be required to use that money for a certain program or project. And then as those funds are repaid to the county EDA, you can then use those monies to capitalize the revolving loan fund and use them for different purposes that would have to be authorized by the EDA, usually through a policy that describes the purposes, uses, and types of loans that the fund would be willing or capable of making.
So about a month ago, Mary Thompson and I had a meeting with Minnesota Power and representatives from DEED to talk specifically about accessing some of these federal grants. I believe unlike state funds, they end up being much closer to 50-50 rather than a higher percentage cost share. But Minnesota Power and DEED both are aware of opportunities for us in the development corridor that we're talking about and believe that we would have a good case to apply for some of these funds. So that, again, I'd like to think if we had this in place when that pellet company opportunity came through and passed through 3 years ago, that we would have had more flexibility and we might have actually been able to get something like that to land here. And the truth is, there's still opportunity to get something like that to land here, and it would probably qualify for a lot of these programs for development and investment. And so
So are a lot of the programs grants, not loans from the federal government? And so we could take the money in if we met the criteria and the match, and then we could loan them out and then continue to loan.
So typically, in the case of a revolving loan fund, you usually get the money to use for a specific purpose. So even from the state level, if you get an owner-occupied redevelopment loan, you get $500,000. You loan that out, and it has to meet all the guidelines of the program. But when it gets paid back in, you have a lot more flexibility. That becomes the seed money for your open RLF.
Yeah, I understand that, but, I mean, thank you. But when the initial 500,000, is that ever in grant form? So we would get that as a grant,
It's a
but then
grant-
we would,
It's a grant to the agency.
Okay.
But it has to be dispersed in ways that meet the
Yeah, I get that
program.
part, yep.
So it typically comes in as a grant, yep.
Okay.
Or matching funds relative to other funds that you put in.
okay.
Without getting into the weeds here too much, but I also believe there is an opportunity, because that first grant has to be tied to a specific subject, and there's rules you have to follow and how you can use it, prevailing wage, et cetera, and stuff like that probably apply. But I believe there is an option that can be transferred to a nonprofit entity, and then all those rules disappear.
Commissioners, it certainly may be possible. I'll be the first to say I am not an attorney or an attorney spokesperson, but yes, there are any number of structures that are of varying creativity that can allow you to work around some of those requirements if that be so desired. The other thing to keep in mind too is often for revolving loan funds, the monies may be received as grants. Some agencies will also use what are called non-recourse loans, which essentially are loans that would be made to the agency where they could take no additional action outside of the loan. So the county or the Economic Development Authority really wouldn't be on the hook. They also sometimes take the form of forgivable loans. So if you meet certain requirements of the program, if certain payments are made over a certain amount of time, the balance of the loan may be forgiven, and then it takes the form of a grant. Of course, before you entered into any of these, the EDA and the county board would know well in advance the type and structure of the programs and what exactly you were agreeing to and the tails that it may or may not have, or some additional structures, as the commissioner mentioned, that you may want to engage in to accomplish certain programs or projects.
So I have an additional question then about kind of structure and makeup, and I know that comes later with the whole committee process and stuff like that, but it's more about whether it can be done or not is the answer I'm looking for. Our city currently has an EDA, the city of Park Rapids does, and their city council acts as the EDA board, and then they contract with a nonprofit entity to do those EDA functions for them. So in essence, it's a private, public entity doing the work for them. Can that be done in the county? Can the county board be the EDA board and then contract with a nonprofit Economic Development Commission to do the work?
Commissioners, yes, the answer is yes. You really have a lot of latitude as to how you get the set up your EDA board, as well as how you structure things to get the work done. You can have the EDA board be the county commissioners. In Wright County's case, but also in a lot of other cases, the EDA boards are made up of the county board and then one or two outside members from maybe a member community or a business owner or somebody like that. So the voting power stays essentially with the county commissioners, but there is buy-in and participation from some outside people as well. So that would definitely be doable. And then yes, I actually wanted to raise the point that you just noted about contracting. You can really contract with whomever and on whichever terms you want as to staffing and or specific program development and implementation. That's really up to the EDA board in deciding how it wants to put the wheels in motion, so to speak. Or if you want to hire somebody or some kind of a hybrid. I know you do have an economic development commission up there, and it would really be completely a white slate, a blank slate as to determining whether and how you want this EDA to partner with and maybe have a deeper relationship with that organization. So the sky's the limit there in terms of how you think about structuring things.
Bruce, this is Ted. I didn't quite read all 200 and some odd pages of the statute. I did read the Oakdale, the Briggs and Morgan paperwork that you have here. I did see that where they talked about the county board could be the board of commissioners for the EDA. I kind of like that idea. And I had a couple of other questions here, and you kind of just touched on it. The Headwaters Regional Development Commission, I know that they're an EDA and that they do levy a tax here in Hubbard County. So what are the advantages of the county having their own EDA versus just going through HRDC?
I would have to look at the bylaws and authorizing information on Headwaters, and specifically what their not only their legal authority is, but what their practical mandate is. So I think it really speaks to the core question, as I see it, commissioners, is whether and how you want to be more directly involved and have county staff more directly involved in moving forward specific development initiatives. Even if you were to partner with or contract with Headwaters or continue to contract with them in some way, are the tools that you can utilize and are the priorities that you have on your radar, are they of a high enough benefit and high enough urgency that you want to actually set up this kind of an organization yourself? It's not necessarily to say you would never work with Headwaters again, but it might be reimagining how some of that relationship works going forward.
And then Bruce, could we work with more than one development commission? Having HLDC currently here in Park Rapids, HRDC, Greater Bemidji Development Commission has done a lot. I'm on the northern end of the county. They've done some things in my district. So are we limited in the number of people that we can work with?
No, not at all, commissioners.
Okay.
Again, you have a lot of latitude. I would note, because it's a somewhat similar situation, in Wright County, again, they had a long-standing, or have a long-standing economic development partnership, which is a nonprofit, almost kind of a quasi-public organization. And there was a lot of concern and consternation as to whether and how the county would continue to partner with the EDP, as it's called down there, and actually, this EDA process helped to clarify the lanes, right, that each entity wanted to be in going forward, and I think was a positive thing in just clarifying, roles and responsibilities going forward, and I know that the county, and the EDA continue to partner with the EDP, but just with a better, a clear sense of who's doing what.
Okay. And then, I think this is my last question, at least for now. I used to live in Wright County. So I knew all about Buffalo there. I was gonna say some comments there, but yeah, it was a beautiful place on the lake and everything. And
Yeah.
so does Wright County, did they have an HRA or not? Okay, do they currently now, or are they just using their EDA?
They're commissioners. They are just using the EDA for EDA type powers. They've got HRA powers, but they're not anticipating using them. And there is no county HRA. So any HUD related programs, public housing, Section 8, et cetera, are administered there through city HRAs, not through the county.
Thank you.
And one big difference between Wright County and Hubbard County is that Wright County is almost fully built out as cities, whereas we've got 28 townships and 4 cities, and only one that has an economic development and HRA. So that means there's 985 square miles of land that doesn't have any representation or opportunity relative to this. Bruce, your last statement about identifying the scope and the role and the authority and the lanes for everybody, I think that's probably the biggest piece of this puzzle. We have a countywide HRA. They own and manage several properties. We have an RDC, that we belong to. We have an LDC in town that we have relationships with. There's the city EDA and HRA, and honestly, identifying the scope of authority for each one of those different types of organizations and identifying their current lanes and their preferred lanes is probably going to be the biggest task. I would guess that would be a big, if we move forward, that'd be part of the scoping conversation before the board would decide whether or not they wanted to authorize a resolution and start the process and get a committee rolling. So I'm guessing that lane development and conversation is probably the biggest piece that we'll need before we take another step.
Okay. That makes sense. Commissioners, just one last point. We've touched on Park Rapids. I should note that the county EDA establishment section in state law does make clear that the establishment of a county EDA does nothing to preclude or change the authority or the powers of any existing city EDAs, and it doesn't change the ability of any cities within the county to establish new EDAs. So, you might have some of your smaller communities that might just be very happy to have a county EDA working on their behalf and not have any desire to set up that own, an organization like that of their own. But it is important, and one thing that we really stressed in Wright County was that this is about the county. You're not looking to stop or change necessarily how local entities within the county are doing their economic development business. Hopefully there'll be more robust partnership, and we can help with messaging on that and building trust and confidence, including with townships. But it's not going to change what Park Rapids can do with their EDA.
One other question, Bruce, and if there was a project per se in the city of Park Rapids and their EDA didn't have the resources or didn't want to do it, there's nothing precluding the county EDA from doing that project if the city is okay with that, correct? Or to partner with them?
Yeah, no, another great question, and thank you for that, commissioners. No, there is not. The city of Park Rapids would need to opt in to the area of operations for the county EDA. And that is a process that you would go through with all of the cities and townships in the county is asking whether they want to opt in. And really, you can only operate in communities that have opted in. So whatever you're doing, building infrastructure or helping with housing or whatever the case might be. But yes, as long as the city says, yep, we're happy to have this overlap of the county EDA, that you could absolutely take the baton and run with it.
And commissioners, to that point, oftentimes we see in counties that have robust economic development programs, when we review pro formas at Ehlers, we will even see that there is a city contribution, a county EDA contribution. And so when you have those strong partnerships, it can actually unlock more resources for some of these projects that may not otherwise move, but for some of that public assistance, either from the city, the county, EDA, or potentially both.
And that's one of the overlying goals, I think, because the county this county is healthy. It's financially healthy compared to, other areas of the county. So it has the opportunity to bring some of these tools to the table that some of these smaller cities or townships don't have. And that has stopped economic growth several times in our county because those things weren't available. So the county can take more of a leadership role on these things and participate in different things when it makes sense for the taxpayers as a whole.
So getting back to an industrial park development, if we did not do an EDA, then what would be our options to develop that? Could we just, as a board, decide we want to buy that and somehow come up with money from the coffers and move forward?
That is a great question. I would have to drill down and see if there are, as Dan put it earlier, creative ways that you could get that done, whether it'd be a good policy idea or not. Yes, you probably could find a way to do that using cash on hand, but I am not aware of any financing mechanisms that the county could use to build infrastructure or to do grading and other things to make pads available within an industrial park. I think you would have to use cash, and even there, I think we would want to run it by certainly your county attorney, if not a development attorney, just to make sure you weren't running afoul of something, some arcane provision in state law. But I think you probably could get there. It's a question of whether you would want to without an EDA.
Yeah, I know, I'm throwing that out hypothetically. So one more question with that then. Let's say, I'm just throwing this figure out, $5 million. We want to do something that's $5 million. Without an EDA, can the county bond for this economic development project?
Again, no. I'm not aware of any tools that a county would have to put in to acquire land and do the infrastructure that would be required for an industrial park. I think you would have to use cash, and even that I would put an asterisk on.
Commissioners, to I think Bruce's point, something to keep in mind here is that there may be limited public purposes that surround creating an industrial park, and you may even have limited bonding authority, let's say, to support infrastructure around the industrial park. But really one of the benefits of having a county EDA is that the development authorities that are really promulgated in state statute are very clear and absolute versus working in some of these gray areas that may be more challenging to navigate using existing county powers and existing county resources. When you adopt the EDA structure, you will have, as you've seen in the information provided to the county board, any number of authorities that you could use to accomplish the development of an industrial park. As Bruce mentioned, going so far as issuing EDA lease revenue bonds, or if you did raise cash through the EDA, you can actually use those powers to act as limited partner, to guided development. You can make loans if you would be so inclined. You can also partner with other agencies through the EDA to use some of their local power. So if you were partnering, as was kind of posited earlier, with a local jurisdiction, perhaps they could use some of their development powers. We're actually working with a community right now that is taking money from the state and using their EDA to actually own a building and lease it and essentially hold the leases so people can locate in their industrial park. And so you would have some of those tools available to you to be creative. And that will be most important beyond just the county's financing. It's of course a critical and for the county often paramount question. But the second thrust would then be when you enter into these development relationships, what actual flexibility and tools could you provide to property owners, would-be business owners, prospective tenants in an industrial park to make their enjoyment and use of that space as hospitable and, you know, economically productive as possible.
Thank you.
Sounds like if this board was the EDA, we'd have to have two separate meetings then, or back-to-back meetings?
No, you would, you would have to pick a day when you're gonna have the meeting, and it would be on the agenda, but it would be a separate section of the agenda.
Okay, they can be back-to-back.
They can be back-to-back.
Okay.
Yeah, you do have to, commissioners, you do have to officially take off your county board hat and put on your county EDA hat.
Yeah.
But they can be, like Jeff said, back to back, or however you want to structure that.
Bruce, one last question here that I have. And it kind of came up today. Jeff had mentioned some possible legislation that might be coming through that might inhibit us to be able to do some things with the tax forfeited lands. Would we be possible, like with going back to HRDC, the Headwaters Regional, would we be able to do something with them in a sense on the short term until we establish our own EDA to try to get ahead of the legislation?
I don't believe the RDCs have the ability to own property other than their offices.
Okay.
And commissioners, I guess I'm not familiar with exactly the provision you're referring to. I know some of the problems with tax forfeited land and being able to retain the proceeds of selling that land. But no, I think Jeff's right about development commissions, and this is a process by, if you were to set up an EDA, you could then fairly rapidly transfer ownership of tax forfeited land to the EDA, either in bulk or on limited case base, on a limited, case by case basis.
Thank you.
I have a question about HRAs and EDAs working together, and who's responsible for what role. But if a EDA was created and there was a housing component in a development that's being proposed, can a HRA transfer their authorities, their responsibilities to the EDA on a case-by-case basis where housing is needed? Or that component is desired?
Yes, commissioners, you could, or the EDA could just go ahead and do it. If they do stay as separate entities, I think it would be cleaner to, as we were talking about before, better define the lane that the HRA will stay in and the EDA will stay in if they are going to be two separate organizations instead of one. Yes, they could either say, yep, we're good with the EDA doing it, or the EDA could just go ahead and do it of its own accord, and there's really no nothing that the HRA could do or say to veto that or to stand in the way of that.
Okay, thank you.
Bruce, could you speak, this is one of the lane issues, and I want to bring it up quickly. Can you speak about the specific, when you have an HRA, what are their primary purposes as authorized by statute?
Sure. So historically, HRAs have really focused mostly on programs that interface with, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and Minnesota Housing Finance, and really focus on that, more deeply affordable housing and or senior housing that relies significantly on federal and to a lesser extent state funding for viability. And the HRA is then very well versed in all of the myriad rules and regulations that surround those federal and state programs, federal especially. They also will get involved with administering the Section 8 program, the vouchers that are accessible and used, for privately owned housing. Those are really sort of the historical roles of an HRA at a high level. But HRAs also do get involved in developing and owning what I call HRA owned housing, to differentiate it from HUD housing. So this is, housing that might be for seniors, it might be for workforce, that an HRA can develop and operate, maybe accessing some grant money from Minnesota Housing, issuing general obligation housing development bonds or housing revenue bonds to finance a big chunk of that project. HRAs also get involved with low income housing tax credit projects, or LIHTC projects as they're often called, as sponsors of those or partners in helping those happen. Whoever is developing it, whether it's a for-profit developer or a nonprofit developer. But I would say that those public housing programs are kind of the core function, and then there's been more entrepreneurship and sort of housing enterprise by a lot of HRAs, or at least some HRAs across the state in more recent years. And so that development of HRA-owned housing, whether it's multifamily or it's a development of a subdivision, and I've worked with county HRAs on that as well, that's more of that sort of enterprise function that could either be handled by an HRA or by an EDA with HRA powers.
So
Does
Bruce,
that help, Jeff?
Yes, thank you.
so Bruce, in a subdivision, could that be market rate housing, or would it have to be workforce housing?
It really, that's a great question. I'm trying to remember, we worked on that up in Alexandria a number of years ago. I believe there has to be some level of affordability, but it can be pretty close to area median income. And well, actually, I know, I guess it depends on the scope, commissioners, it depends on the scope of the EDA's or the HRA's involvement in putting in infrastructure or actually helping to finance the construction of the houses. There's a few permutations that could dictate whether or not there is an affordability requirement. But I will say, typically, when an EDA or an HRA gets involved, they at least want it to be, at or slightly below area median income, typically because they want, some alignment with their mission and objectives.
Thank you.
So I think you get an idea of the lane conversation that we're trying to have and some of the primary questions we have. I'm wondering, next steps would be, if the board is interested in getting a proposal from Ehlers to move forward a scope of work like this, to identify those lanes and that conversation and the possibilities, to work with the board, and work through these step by step. Is that something we're still interested in doing?
I would add, I think with all of our discussions, I think we've had over the past 3 years, if we're going to want to accomplish some of those things long-term, I think we need these tools. If we don't have these tools, we're going to run into the same problems we've always run into and not be able to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves to us. The only concern I have is, as we go down this path of there's been a lot of goodwill built within the business community and with existing economic development commissions and the like, that we don't want to create something new that stops that momentum that's been gained. We want this to enhance what has already been occurring. So that's my only concern, is a lot of thought process is gonna have to go into that step 4 and that step 5, and making sure we get the right input to see what works best for our area. But I do think we need a countywide EDA, or we're gonna have, a hard time accomplishing some of the things some of the commissioners want, and, well, for that matter, all the commissioners, I believe, want for the county in the future.
Yeah, for me, it's two primary things that I think that we need the EDA, and that is, acquiring the property and developing it, and then the funding. Seems like those would work best through an E EDA.
And I don't think it hurts to continue the process here.
So, Bruce and Dan, I think you heard a consensus there that we should take a look at what the next step would be and identify what a proposal would be and bring that forward soon.
That sounds great. Thank you, Jeff and commissioners. I will also take a look in a little more detail as to how the Wright County process played out. And Dan and I can put a little more detail into the sort of draft proposal, if you will, that you have in front of you, so that you have a better sense of what you might be looking for in terms of cost and timing and so on. Knowing that, these community conversations and conversations with stakeholders may take longer or shorter than estimated, but I think we can get you a next iteration of the proposal here in short order, and we look forward to working with you.
But just to confirm, if the board gets to the point of adopting a resolution to create a committee, the committee's charged with making a recommendation. The board can accept that recommendation or make one of the choices on their own, correct?
Correct.
Yep, okay. Ultimately, facilitate a conversation and then still be responsible for making the right determination based on your experience. Switch and take over and look at FMP next. Is that what we want to do next, or do you want to? Okay.
We can certainly launch into the proposal for the long-term financial management plan. So commissioners, one of the other documents, it's entitled Proposal for Long-Term Financial Plan, is a proposal from Ehlers to help the county with kind of looking over the next 10 years at your financial position and some of the moving parts as it relates to your programs, projects, and activities. As mentioned in the proposal, we are aware that the county is interested in making some investments in the county facilities, and there's also a desire, I'm sure, over at least the next 10 years to augment or consider additional staff as the county grows and programs change and certain other county board goals come online. And so as you can see in the proposal, generally with a financial management plan, we use a 10-year time horizon, and we analyze both the county's operations and capital programs. And we really build in a series of different variables to understand kind of all of the moving parts and provide you really with a dynamic tool to understand the county's financial position, the resources that you have available, and perhaps most importantly, how any decisions the county board might make will impact the financial position of your organization and your ability to fund or finance large capital projects. At present, after discussing the proposal with the county administrator, we have kind of looked at and are proposing to include 9 different funds of the county, which would include the general fund, the road and bridge fund, the social services fund, the debt service fund, the heritage community enterprise fund, the land management special revenue fund, solid waste fund, HRA general fund, and the HRA housing fund. I would also add that if the county board were so inclined to move forward with establishing a county-wide EDA, we could also add a 10th fund, a county EDA fund. So we could certainly look at, or at least contemplate, what an EDA fund would look like and some of the resources that the county could bring to bear as a part of that process. Of course, we don't want to put the cart before the horse with regard to the EDA process itself, but it would be timely with the discussion of the financial management plan to also talk about what potential financial resources could be available to a countywide EDA effort. So,
And if I could just jump in for 1 second on the question of which funds to include, we can either, start with that list of funds that Dan listed off, or a smaller list or a larger list, but also know that we often work on updates to and expansions of financial management plans for our clients, so that even if you decide to start with, let's say, a subset of the funds here, if you really find value and want to have a more robust set of funds all interconnected in this model, that is something that can be done later on as well. It doesn't have to all be decided up front.
Yeah, to that point, the financial management plan is really a robust tool. It can be tailored to meet any of the county's needs. And even in some situations, we've stretched them out a few more years if we know that something is just in that 11th or 12th year and you still want to have a look at it. So we're not necessarily hemmed in by what the proposal says as far as, some of the levers that we can pull to make it as useful as possible to the county board, the organization at large. When we develop a financial management plan, we look at least 3 years of history. So we would ask the county for 3 years of actuals, and then we also look at the current budget year and the next budget year, depending on where we are at in the process. Sometimes you have that next year budget information, sometimes not. It just kind of depends on when the work starts. From that, we basically build an initial plan, and we would have a couple meetings with county staff to go over the moving parts and what we're seeing, get feedback from them about kind of any things or questions that we have as we review the numbers and raise any issues. And then from there, assuming that they're comfortable moving forward, we would then bring it to at least 2 county board meetings. What ends up happening usually is we present the plan at a county board meeting much like this, go through all the funds, talk about any recommendations or observations, answer any questions, initial questions, I should say, that you may have. And then normally we come back for a second meeting to walk through any of the questions that were raised during that first meeting that can't be just addressed immediately in that meeting. If we have to go back and crunch a few more numbers or change some assumptions to meet with your expectations or the county board's general position about what the financial plan should look like moving forward. And then usually once we get to the end of that process, it's not required, but oftentimes the governing board will then take a vote, usually just something like accept the financial management plan. And then oftentimes from that point, especially at this part in the year, then it would be turned over to county staff, and then they typically use that to inform kind of the budget development process for that upcoming year. And so we do find it's actually a very helpful tool for governing boards, because by the time that annual budget comes back to you, a lot of the things that would be reflected in that budget have already been discussed either through various county work sessions, of course, through your typical process, or raised in that financial management plan. So really it ends up dovetailing quite nicely with the annual budget development process. Something we also like to say too, the financial management plan is also a wonderful tool to kind of put things on the radar. They don't necessarily have to make it into the annual budget, but it's a good forum to talk about what the county may or may want to do. As one of my colleagues at Ehlers likes to say, it's an excellent document to do a lot of what-if-ing with. So we can definitely put things in, see how stuff shakes out, and then really give the county board and the organization a sense of what would happen if you made a particular decision. What we often find is very valuable at the governing body level is that if we include everything, really then it becomes a question of, well, if we're going to do X, Y, and Z, does that mean we're not going to do A, B, and C because there's only so much money to go around? And so sometimes you get to the end of the process and you find out we're going to do X, B, and Z, and those other ones are going to be kind of left by the wayside for the time being. But in that way, the governing board really gets the opportunity to make active decisions about these projects and really have a keen understanding of how it affects the financial position of the organization.
And on that point, financial position, the bottom lines we often find with county boards are, what does it mean for our property tax rate, right, and actual property tax impact, but also what does this mean for our fund balances? Because we can do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, hey, no problem, but if it's going to crater your fund balances and or require a big spike in your property tax levies, that's probably not going to go very far, either from a policy or a political perspective. And so, like Dan was saying, this is a really helpful hands-on way of testing certain sets of assumptions, seeing what the political and policy appetite is, what you think is really feasible and affordable, and sustainable from a financial perspective for the county, and then to have that confidence going forward with whatever set of projects or operating efforts you see fit to advance. We can also stress test with different assumptions regarding growth, property base. We know that you've had an influx of property value from the Enbridge line. Well, we can take some looks at that as well and model out other scenarios relating to some of your resources to give you a sense of where those guardrails might be for your community. So it's you can tell that Dan and I are geeks about this kind of stuff, but it's pretty cool in your ability to test not only assumptions on capital priorities and operating priorities, but also maybe some of the underlying assumptions about property tax base and or other variables as well.
I've done this process before with Bruce and with Ehlers, and it's a great model, as he's saying, to test a lot of assumptions. If we want to do this, and we want to do this, and we want to do this, how do they all play out? And in light of the complexity of the organization, as he mentioned, if we were to start with our 5 or 6 core funds, we'd be looking at the general fund, the highway, social services, solid waste, and natural resource management would probably be the bulk of our funds, right? But it might be really good to test some assumptions relative to the nursing home and economic development possible impacts. I think right now it'd be really good to take a look at some of those together. But you can take a look at policies too, fund balance policies, investment policies. All of those things are going to be affected by are going to be influenced by the results of this modeling process. And it's really a great way to make the whole of the organization a lot more transparent, right? If there's a way to take a look at $65 million and explain it in a couple of spreadsheets and a couple of summary statements, that's what I've been trying to do, and I think we've made a lot of progress with the new capital plan, identifying those impacts, taking a look, making sure we're incorporating our debt service into that conversation, taking a look at operations versus future investments. We've done some of this. I'd say we've made about a 15 to 20% stride towards what this kind of a model will allow us to really do, to project into the future and model that into, specifically when we're doing current year budgets, we're always looking at a 10-year horizon. This board has been really good about looking out 2 to 3 to 4 years, as we've been, looking at Enbridge opportunity, capital projects, things like that. This will just stretch it out a little bit further and give us some more tools for reporting on that, which will be good for you and the public as well.
I know we discussed this quite a bit. Did we include some of these in our budget
Yes.
to fund them?
Yep.
So-
And Commissioners,
Well, I was just gonna say, we've talked about this for a long time. I think it would be great to move forward. And
Two ways that we would have to pay for this is, I believe I have some professional services in the administrator account, and 2, we have undesignated funds still in the 24 economic development account, money that was set aside. So there's ways that we could do this in 24 with current budgeted monies. You'd have to designate something.
Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was just going to say, one of the things I like to say about financial planning, and I think Bruce and Jeff both touched on it, is like it's really not about limiting the county board. Really, financial planning is a way for us to have a conversation and make possible the things that excite you, and to really figure out how you can use the resources of the organization and bring those ideas to fruition. I like to joke that whenever anyone has a good idea, the next question that gets asked is, how are you going to pay for it? And so this financial management plan helps answer that second question, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, and done well, it should pay for itself, more than pay for itself.
That is certainly our hope, Commissioner. So ultimately, if the board were to decide to move forward, as you can see on page 3 under project schedule, we would be proposing that the FMP would be completed by May of 2024. The one caveat we always attach to this, it really depends on how timely we get some of the information, and then of course the cadence of any staff or county board meetings. Sometimes we'll do them at regular county board meetings, or at times, because they can sometimes be, depending on the questions and feedback, they can last an hour or two. If you go through all the various funds, they can sometimes be special meetings as well. So it depends on some of those moving parts, but generally in or around May of this year is when we would anticipate to be back in front of the county board talking to you about the moving parts and some of our findings and recommendations.
The intention, of course, is to be done in time for consideration of this year's budgeting,
Great, great.
which we won't get into we got some latitude there.
Would the board consensus be to move forward? Like, you guys think this is,
So,
okay. Steve?
Yes.
Okay.
come up with a specific, proposal to put on an agenda either next week or the first week of March. You guys ready to have this conversation before the end of the week and get it out for Tuesday, or get it out for the first Tuesday in March?
I think we can, again, sort of like with the EDA proposal, take another run through it, just confirm some assumptions, fine tune a few things. And then I don't see why we couldn't get it to you by the end of the week. I know that we also have staff capacity with some of our colleagues, and we would love to jump in and with both feet and get to work with you if you saw fit to do that.
Okay.
If there's a lot to read, I'd like to have it for the weekend.
Yeah, so
That's true.
So our deadline would be for me to have it by 10 a.m. Thursday to be able to include it in the packet. And if we're pressed on that,
I think that's fine.
okay.
Yep, we can do that. Great, well, thank you very much, and I think you'll be really pleased with the process, and please also know that we have, one last word is, we have had some situations in which we've been presented with a list of capital priorities and operating priorities, and we've had to tell clients, look, we have to pull some things out really to make it feasible, unless you are willing to contemplate, tax and fee increases of a certain degree. And we won't be shy. I think everything that we've heard is within the realm of feasibility, but we won't be shy raising our hands and saying, we think you're stressing yourselves if the model is telling us that. So it will be a robust exercise for sure.
I will say to Bruce's point, and I'm not saying this would happen in the Hubbard County iteration, but one of my favorite things that usually happens is we may have a governing board or a particular commissioner or council member that will say, well, put it all in and tell us what it would cost. And then we sometimes come back and say, okay, well, if we did it all like next year like you wanted, it'd be like a 31% increase in the property tax levy. And then that, I always like the reaction in those situations. It's always fun, so. Like I said, Bruce said we're nerds, but I'm a total dork for this stuff, so.
Great. Well, thank you, commissioners. Just the last information we have for you, and this won't take as much time, is just a quick financing projection for a possible jail financing next year. As Jeff mentioned at the outset of the discussion, Dan and I spoke with him at the Ehlers seminar last week, and we talked about this possible project and that you're doing some work on space needs and such. And so what we wanted to do is just give you a sense of how a new financing could work and how it could be sort of dovetailed with your existing 2020 bonds that you still have outstanding. So this first page just is a super simple cash flow of the debt service that you have remaining on your 2020 bonds, and then the first several years of debt service on a 2025 issue to fund $11 million of project costs. And we just used $11 million as a benchmark, a placeholder, knowing that it might be less, it might be more, a lot of variables still in play in terms of the scope and the cost of that project. But the thing I wanted to start with at the outset, and I imagine you've talked about this before with both Jeff and Kay, is that, you know, you have both this year and next year still some fairly significant debt service that's coming due on the 2020 bonds in the order of $820,000 per year. But then you can see in calendar and fiscal year 2026 that drops down quite a bit to about 230 some thousand dollars per year going out through 2031, that being the last payment on February 1 of 2031. So you can see that big drop there, and you do have a question then of whether and how you want to utilize that freed up debt levy capacity there in fiscal 26 and going forward. So what we did is took a look at how you might structure a new bond, again, to finance $11 million of costs. And what you can see here is what that estimated debt service impact would be. Interest-only payments in fiscal 26 totaling about $640,000. And then you can see new debt service of about $830,000 per year. This is assuming a 25-year repayment term in the years after. So when you look at the two bonds together, you can see that we are showing a slight increase from 25 to 26, and then a little bit more in going from 26 to 27. But then once those 2020 bonds are paid off in 2031, you could see that debt service dropping down again to just the $830,000 range. We can shape and finesse this debt service a little bit more to get rid of that little bit of a bump you see in 27 through 31. Or you could just say, yep, that looks pretty good to us and is achievable. And again, this all depends, of course, on how much you ultimately decide to bond for the project or whether to do the project. So I just want to share that as an initial indication of how you could utilize that freed up capacity from the 2020 bonds. And then the next couple of pages are just the debt service in a little more detail on the 2020 bonds, and then that hypothetical scenario for a 2025 bond issue, again, to fund $11 million of project costs. And with that, I will gladly take any questions you have, or Dan can answer them as well.
I just wondering about the coupon rate of only 3.05. How in the world can you get that?
Well, interest rates have come down from the high points that we saw last year, and actually, commissioners, we've only assumed a county credit rating on this of a AA, which we know you would be able to achieve. Depending on a number of variables, we might actually even be able to obtain the state's credit enhancement on top of this with a AAA rating, which would get even lower interest rates. So where we show an estimated true interest cost on this scenario of 4.12% in aggregate in total with all issuance costs included, very likely, at least if you're looking at this in today's market, if you sold this kind of a bond issue in 2024, you would be looking at a substantially lower overall interest rate.
So there are a lot of timing mechanisms here. I asked Bruce to show this in the best possible light of allowing the existing debt to kind of drop off before we take on the major portion of this debt. But there could be a timing piece. Whereas, would we issue debt in 24? How would we structure it? Would we wait and issue it in 25 so that we don't have payments until 26? There's a lot of different options here, but the important thing to say in starting down the evaluating the jail project, what we kind of identified is the debt dropping off in 26 was going to allow us to take on that much space without having to significantly impact the amount of money we set aside for repayment. And this is showing that that's true. This bump that's out in 2027, we'd have 2-3 years to plan for, and it wouldn't be difficult to make that happen. Or, as Bruce said, there's opportunities to smooth that out. What that means is we push some of that further down to the back end of the debt, which may or may not be, so there's timing issues, we're in a good position to make the investment in that project now so that we don't have to touch it again for the next 25 or 30 years, as Bruce Schwartzman had talked about, so. This is just the model, the basic model. There's a lot of other decisions that have to be made. The good news is this is absolutely would be incorporated in a financial management plan and modeling what our debt would look like, what the options are.
In Commissioners, I misspoke earlier. I said this was a 25-year repayment term. As you can see from the last page, we're actually looking at a 20-year repayment term. And that would, that's pretty typical for counties, including for facilities like a jail, but a lot of counties go 25 or 30 years or somewhere in between. You don't have to go in 5-year increments for something with the useful life of a project like this. So that would make it even more affordable. Of course, just like a home mortgage, the longer you spread it out, the more interest you pay overall. But there are ways to reduce these payments and like we said earlier, to shape them, to meet whatever your financial objectives might be.
And we would have the option to buy down that initial debt issuance with cash. But a brief conversation is right now we're making more money on our investments than we would be paying on our interest on this. So we're in a relatively good place to say, take that money we might use to buy down and put it in a long-term investment and let it sit there to pay some of this debt going forward. We're really in a good position relative to this. Good long-term financial planning and cash management by the county leaves us in a position with lots of options right now. But that's just one scenario, and as we are moving forward with the next couple of phases with Bruce Schwartzman and BKV, we'll need to have those numbers in mind because those will be the ones that'll inform the decision to authorize the project and move forward with the bonding for the project. We will have to bond for the project at some point if we do that. The number is somewhere between $8 and $11 million probably. I don't know that we would have more than a couple million we could free up. We could probably go 3 over the course of the 3 years that we're doing it without strapping our fund balance, but we wouldn't want to do any more than that. And right now, with numbers the way they are, we'd be better off using somebody else's money.
Anything else for Bruce and Dan?
I think that's all we had for you. We really appreciate the conversation, and we look forward to working with you.
And thank you for the time this morning.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
See you, Bruce.
So I have a couple things. One is, there's a meeting today for the hazard mitigation plan. I'm wondering if anybody is planning to go. Ted, good. Tom, you are too? Wonderful.
It's a Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, I have another meeting at 1 o'clock, so I can't make that. There is a fuel meeting on Thursday that I can't make. Is someone able to go at 9 a.m.?
I will be there, and administratively, that covers for this one.
Okay. Okay, and then, none of us are going to the cities, right, next week? So Jeff said he would participate in the MRC meeting for us.
Perfect.
Okay. And then the only other thing I had was, there was not a resignation at the HRA meeting last night, and so Jeff will move forward with the investigation.
And part of that motion was, once we got the charges, she would be suspended.
Right, we have to wait until we give her notice, isn't that right,
We
Jeff?
would have to present that list
Yeah.
and provide notice of suspension. So I believe the draft that I have been working on includes the language from the statute would include suspended until such a time as you have an opportunity to rebut the.
Does the board have anything else? All right.
Motion to adjourn?
Yep. Okay.